Yeah, so I found myself today in one of those times where I just was like feeling all of, well, I was just traveling home from visiting my siblings in San Diego. And today, folks may have heard, was the day that the mask mandate was lifted for air travel. So it was just like this very disorienting experience on the plane and in the airport with like lots of people with no masks um and there's also been a number of losses in my life recently, and I got home, I just felt very kind of ungrounded, disoriented, um like feeling grief one moment and numbness the next. And I was just like, whew, what am I even gonna how am I even gonna like give a Dharma talk tonight? I'm in such a state. And then I remembered like, oh, like the Buddha has pointed to the difficulty of our experience, and it's like such a great reminder that I might find myself with all of these different feelings of confusion, um, anxiety, grief, numbness, feeling lost or disconnected. The Buddha said that there are three characteristics of our experience that are always there. And those are impermanence, that everything changes, unsatisfactoriness or suffering, and non-self. So these three, they call them the three marks of existence or three characteristics. And just remembering that today actually was like, okay, I am not doing this wrong. Like life is marked by these characteristics that, that that everything is subject to change, that we lose people and beings that we care about, that even, our experience is fleeting, that that there is suffering, that things are, in a range from just uncomfortable or unsatisfactory all the way to pain and suffering. This is just a part of existence. And also that we ourselves are subject to change. So this last concept of no self or non-self. And I want to particularly focus on this last one of non-self, because I think it has certainly been particularly interesting for me as a queer and trans person. But I just want to, even before moving to that, just say, I guess I was finding it reassuring today to think about, okay, this is the way that things are in some ways, that we are subject to suffering, loss, and change. And it feels like in this time of, as we're into the third year of being in a pandemic and things changing often in ways that don't make any sense, these characteristics are very, very present, very real, and something that like I feel like, oh, I just can't ignore this. I can't ignore that these characteristics are here. So it's helpful to me that the Buddha pointed them out, and so I can like think about how am I in relationship with these characteristics, because they're not going to go away. And a few things that have helped for me, one is just that like this like kind of normalizing, okay, there is suffering, there is loss, and things are always changing. And I think of the wisdom of Octavia E. Butler and her, particularly her earth seed verses in the parable of the talents and parable of the sower, where she was like, okay, let's reorient around this concept of change, and said, you know, God is change. And how can we then like engage with that change and shape it for ourselves and for the world? Yeah, so how can we just get in relationship with this something that is just true about life? Things change. Another one that's been helpful for me, which I got from one of my teachers, Erin Treat, she shared that her vow is, I accept everything as material for my awakening. So when things are really challenging, can also like kind of honor that challenge, honor those ways that that I am being like impacted and moved and you know, sort of tumbled in the you know, in the river of life, that I can be like, okay, this is here to teach me something. I can be in a relationship of some acceptance and gratitude towards even the difficult things by saying, I accept everything as material for my awakening. May not be comfortable or fun, but I am here to get as awake as I can. So all of, you know, I accept these losses, these changes, these things that are challenging as part of my own awakening. And then a third thing that's been helpful for me is sometimes I just almost as a mantra say, I don't know. Like, there can be a way that like my mind can get into trying to figure things out. And I feel like if I have learned anything through this period of being in pandemic, it is that I just don't know what's coming next. I don't know how things are going to change. And it's like, today was one of those days where I was like, oh, I had no idea, you know, traveling to San Diego a few days ago, that I'd be flying back with half the plane with people having no masks on. Like, I just would never have guessed that. And it is like changes come in such a almost seems random way. Can I just let go of even trying to figure it out? You know, if I'm trying to anticipate, and I've learned over and over again, I can't anticipate what's going to happen next. Can I just let go of that and just say, I don't know? So yeah, and just then seeing, is that something that can relax in some way, relax the anxious or judgmental mind? Like, it doesn't mean that we have to be okay with everything that happens. Like, we can still be in very active, like, this is what I need, this is how I need things to be, in our, you know, asserting our needs and requests, and also know that we have, you know, there's all of these things we don't have any control over. And just be in a place of not knowing. So that is one of the things that can be helpful for me, is just to sometimes say over and over to myself, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know. And there's some peace in that, paradoxically, for me. Yeah, so just knowing that, like, okay, this is how it is. We are going to experience suffering, loss, and change. And like resting in that knowledge. And I wanted to particularly focus in on this piece, this third mark of non-self, and the Pali word for it is anatta, A-N-A-T-T-A. I can put that in the chat. And this is, I feel like of the three marks of impermanence, suffering or unsatisfactoriness, and non-self, this third one is the least obvious. It's like, okay, obviously, yes, things change. And obviously, yes, there is suffering. But then what's this third one about? This one of non-self. I feel like it's taken me some time to understand it. And I think as a queer and trans person, I feel like my identity is actually very important to me. And it's something that is very real in my experience. So what does it mean to say that there is not a self? You know, I immediately am like, wait a second, like I have my whole life experienced the world treating me a certain way because of who I am, because of my identity. And so like I feel the reality of that. And I think that can be true across a lot of different identities, and maybe particularly when we have multiple marginalized identities. So, you know, there's also like if we're a lesbian and we're Black and we're a woman or whatever it might be, we'll see how all of those, you know, as we talk about with intersectionality, all of those identities are like intersect and overlap in such a way that we're just having some very real impacts in our lives because of systems of oppression. So, you know, those things are really real. And at the same time, there's parts of our experience that change within those identities. So I think, you know, in particularly looking at just for myself, as I look back at my own gender journey, there has been a great deal of change. And there are identities that I have held in my life that felt like the most important thing to my experience that I have ended up letting go of. So I know there was a time, you know, when I came out as a young baby dyke, my identity as a butch was like really the central piece of my identity. That was a piece I could not ever imagine letting go of. And certainly it was one that I really held on to for a very long time. And as I, over just the past 5 years, have transitioned to a trans-masculine identity, that identity has completely fallen away. And I would never have imagined, you know, when I was in my 20s or 30s, that I would be now in my 50s identifying as male and trans-masculine and letting go of these identities that were so core. So that's just been a place where, while these identities were so real and so important, they've also changed and shifted. And moving through my own process of transition has been an incredible like opportunity to just feel the shifting of identity within my own experience. And, you know, I spent I spent the first 48 years of my life identified as female, though that was never an identity that I really felt comfortable. It always felt like a badly fitting shoe. And then I've spent the past 5 years identified as male in the world, and that is more comfortable, but it still is not like, when I think, well, what does it feel like to be male, or what did it feel like to be female? Like, neither of those things really has an answer. At any moment that I check into my own experience, there is not an experience of maleness or femaleness. Even as my body has changed, there is not a place where I find like, okay, now that I can grow a beard, or now that my muscles feel a certain way, oh, do I feel male? No, there is no actual experience of that. So that could be a place where I can notice that this concept of gender, which is like so core to even how we experience the world, it's one of the first, I can even notice for myself as I walk around, I identify everyone as like there's some part of my mind that is saying, oh, that person's female, that person's male, or that person might be non-binary, but that is like something that's happening in the background of my mind. I've even noticed that I'll tend to gender animals when I don't even know, and it isn't even relevant. So it's such a powerful conditioning in our minds, and feels so real. And at the same time, through my own gender transition, through moving through both a change in my social identity, as well as actually going through the second puberty of changing the hormones in my body, I've gotten to see that there are things that are very real, as well as things that aren't there at all. So, on the one hand, my experience is very different. Instead of having, every time I go into the women's bathroom, having to, navigate people's fear and anger and reactions to whether or not they feel like I should be there. Now I have great ease. I go into the men's bathroom, no one ever questions my presence there. So there's this way that my life is actually really tangibly different. And at the same time, the sexual experience of gender feels very, very illusory. And then I also want to acknowledge that for other identities, there isn't even the possibility of changing that kind of experience. If you're born Black, you're going to die Black. It is not something that changes. The perception of race in our culture is so powerful, there is no opportunity for change. So I can have an identity where there is this opportunity for change, but there are, there are other identities where there isn't an opportunity for change, that kind of change. So just trying to hold the paradox of the ways that constructed identities, particularly the ones that have been really really built into our systems of dominance, like white supremacy, those things feel just very very real, very unchangeable within what we think of as our relative reality. And then in some ultimate reality, we know also that race is completely a construct, that gender is also constructed, that these are not real categories, but they're very real in our lives. And I think holding this space that we hold together as Alphabet Sangha is so important. It's so important for us to be able to be in this space where we can be together as queer and trans community. And the same would be true for like POC Sangha or other affinity spaces. And then we also hold that in some way there is some when we actually feel into our own experience, this concept of self or identity can be really ephemeral or kind of can disintegrate. So just holding it as a paradox, I think that's what I have been, that's the place that I've come to, is really holding this as a paradox, holding that both things are true, that my identities are very real and have a very real impact in my life and social interactions. And at the same time, I can have a very direct experience of gender itself, there not being any real substance to it. So I'm more invited as an ongoing investigation and just seeing like, how is this for us? You know, where are those identities that feel very real, very core to our experience, and where are the places where we might feel identity fall away? And, you know, are there places where, you know, we have to let go of and grieve some of our identities as we change, and other places where we might actually experience a sense of liberation as identities shift and change. So just kind of like inviting that as an investigation. How, you know, are there places, where are the places where we feel a sense of self or identity changing? It could even be with, as we get older, as different circumstances in our lives change, maybe as relationships begin or end. Where do we experience that as a place of liberation? Where do we experience it as a place of loss?